Okay, so this article from the Spiritual Seek, spirituality is not to be found in counter-information and alternative media.
Yeah.
Really got my wheels turning.
Yeah, it's an interesting title for sure.
I mean, we're all about exploring different perspectives and, questioning the mainstream narrative, but
Right.
this article is kind of flipping the script
Yeah.
and saying,
Yeah.
hold on a second. Is all this counter-information, all this alternative media, is it actually helping us grow spiritually?
It is a provocative question.
It is.
And I think the article does a really good job of dissecting the whole dynamic between mainstream media and alternative media.
Right, from the start.
And how those two forces kind of play off of each other.
Yeah, it's like they set the stage by reminding us, okay, mainstream media, controlled by these big institutions, they shape the dominant narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then alternative media pops up as the challenger.
Yeah, the voice of dissent.
Yeah, exactly, offering a different perspective, questioning those assumptions that the mainstream media might be putting out there.
And, that's often where we find those really interesting, thought-provoking ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
But here's where the article gets, I think, really insightful. It argues that alternative media is inherently defined by its opposition to the mainstream.
Oh, interesting.
It needs that mainstream narrative to push back against.
So it's like it can't exist without the other.
In a way, yeah.
I hadn't thought about it that way.
It makes you wonder if it's always reacting to something, always in that mode of opposition.
Yeah, can it really lead to something new?
Can it truly foster genuine spiritual growth? Or does it keep us stuck in this cycle of negativity?
Yeah, I can see that.
It's a really good point. But of course, there is value in questioning the mainstream narrative.
Absolutely.
Critical thinking is essential.
Absolutely, yeah.
But what the article highlights, and I think this is where it gets into some really interesting territory, is the potential pitfalls of what it calls counter-information.
Okay, yeah, they use that term specifically.
Right, and they argue that counter-information, a lot of times, functions as this kind of reactive mechanism.
It's more about tearing down than building up.
Yeah, it's focused more on dismantling the mainstream narrative than on actually offering constructive alternatives.
Right. So they're not necessarily coming to the table with, like, here's a better solution.
Exactly.
It's more like, here's what's wrong with what you're saying.
Yeah, and they give some really good examples in the article, like,
I was just thinking of those here.
those groups that are vehemently opposed to surveillance technologies.
Right.
But they don't necessarily propose a concrete vision for privacy in the digital age.
It's like they're so focused on what they don't want that they haven't really thought about what they do want.
Exact, right.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Or those who criticize artificial intelligence, but they're not actively engaging in conversations about ethical development or responsible use of AI.
So it's like they're not part of the solution.
They're not part of the conversation in a constructive way.
Yeah, it's all about fighting against something.
Right.
Rather than, like you said, coming to the table with solutions.
And the article, I think, makes this really fascinating point about this idea of progress being unstoppable.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept.
They suggest that while we might try to redirect progress, that underlying human drive to kind of push boundaries, to explore new frontiers, it's inherent to our nature,
Are they saying that we're always going to be pushing forward in some way?
It's like, can you really stop a river from flowing?
It's a good analogy.
Yeah, and the article doesn't explicitly say that.
Okay.
But it does raise this really interesting question of whether resistance to certain forms of progress might actually be futile in the long run.
Okay, I like that.
And it challenges us to think about how that relates to our own spiritual journeys.
Ooh, interesting.
Right. Like, is there a parallel there?
Right.
Can we apply that idea of unstoppable progress to our own spiritual evolution?
That's deep, man.
It is something to ponder, for sure.
It is.
And then the article goes on to connect counter-information with conservatism and traditionalism.
Okay, let's unpack that.
They're arguing that this type of media often aims to preserve the status quo.
To resist change.
Yes, resisting change rather than embracing it.
Interesting.
And they give a few examples like, the resistance to globalization.
Okay.
The skepticism towards advancements in artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I could see that.
Even that kind of romanticized longing for simpler times.
Yeah, like that good old days kind of thinking.
Exactly. And those sentiments often underpin a lot of these counter-information narratives.
I mean, doesn't honoring tradition have its place, though?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, isn't there something to be said for learning from the past?
Of course, yeah.
Is it always wrong to resist change?
No, it's not always wrong, and the article acknowledges that it's a delicate balance, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm thinking about traditions that promote values like community, connection to nature, those kinds of things.
Right, those are valuable.
Absolutely worth preserving.
So where's the line?
Well, the article doesn't advocate for just blindly embracing every new development.
Right.
But it challenges us to examine whether clinging too tightly to the past out of fear or a desire to maintain control can actually hinder our spiritual growth.
Interesting. So if we're always looking back, we might miss what's ahead.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting because the article takes this really kind of fascinating spiritual turn.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
They start exploring the concept of opposition as a form of energy transfer.
Whoa, okay, now we're getting metaphysical.
A little bit, yeah. And they suggest that when we actively oppose something, we inadvertently give it energy, we feed it with our attention.
It's like that saying, what you resist persists.
Exactly. And the more we push against it, the more defined and entrenched it becomes.
Okay, I can see that.
And they bring in all these different examples from various spiritual traditions to illustrate this concept of non-resistance.
Like what?
Well, for example, Taoism emphasizes the power of yielding, of aligning yourself with the natural flow of the universe. And Buddhism teaches about detachment, about letting go of our attachments to desires and outcomes.
So they're saying that by fighting against something, we might actually be strengthening it.
That's the idea they're exploring, yeah.
Even if we don't mean to.
Even if we don't consciously intend to, right?
Wow, that's pretty mind-blowing.
And they use this really interesting example of digital currencies.
Okay.
They argue that by vehemently opposing them, you might inadvertently be legitimizing and reinforcing them in the public consciousness.
I'd never thought about it that way.
It's a really thought-provoking perspective.
It is.
It makes you wonder if all this focus on battling external forces could actually be diverting energy from that internal transformation that true spirituality demands.
So maybe it's not about fighting the external world.
Maybe it's about shifting our focus inward.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a key point that the article is driving at.
Okay.
They're asking us to consider whether our obsession with counter-information and alternative media might actually be keeping us distracted from the real work.
The real work of spiritual growth.
Exactly, which ultimately happens within it. Right.
Okay, so then what's the alternative?
Well, that's where this concept of non-resistance comes into play.
Okay.
And it's a lot more nuanced than just giving up or becoming passive.
Right, because I was going to say, it's not about just being a doormat. Right?
No, exactly. And we'll delve into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, I can't wait.
So this idea of non-resistance, it's not about becoming a doormat.
Right. Yeah, that's that what we're talking about.
It's not about passively accepting whatever comes our way.
No, it's about...
It's about consciously choosing how we respond to the world around us.
Okay, so we still have a choice.
We always have a choice, right?
Right.
And it's about not getting swept up in that current
of reactivity and opposition.
It's so easy to get pulled into that.
It is.
Especially with like the 24-hour news cycle and social media.
It's a constant barrage.
It is. And it's like, you read something and you immediately have that like...
that knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what we're trying to step back from.
So non-resistance is more about like shifting our mindset.
Yeah, it's about shifting our mindset and our energy.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Rather than just giving in or giving up.
So we're not just saying, like, whatever happens, happens.
No, it's not about that.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that true power often lies in letting go.
Letting go.
Of the need to control.
Oh.
Or fight against every perceived threat or injustice.
That's hard.
It is hard, but the article suggests that by releasing that grip, we free ourselves up.
To what?
To create, to connect, to cultivate inner peace.
So it's not just about, like, not doing something.
It's about doing something different. It's about doing something that's actually aligned with, like, who we want to be.
Exactly.
And what we want to see in the world.
Yes, and they offer some really concrete examples in the article.
Oh, I was just thinking about those.
Of what this might look like in practice.
Okay, lay it on me.
Like, instead of getting all fired up about the rise of digital currencies.
Yeah, which can be easy to do.
It can be.
Because there's a lot of fear around that.
There is, but they suggest, like, why not focus on reducing your reliance on money in general?
Okay, so it's not about, like, fighting against the digital currency itself.
It's about looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, and finding solutions that actually align with your values
Exactly.
rather than just reacting against what you oppose.
And another example they give is government surveillance.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
And instead of just, protesting and railing against the system.
Right, because that can be really draining too.
It can be.
And sometimes it feels like it's not even accomplishing anything.
Yeah, so they recommend cultivating inner peace.
Okay, through mindfulness practices.
So it's like, look, you can't control what the government does,
Right.
but you can control how you react to it,
How you cultivate your own inner state.
which can be really empowering.
It is about reclaiming your agency,
Okay.
your inner freedom in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming.
I like that.
And they also talk about car dependency
Okay. Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately.
and how instead of getting caught up in all the debates about electric vehicles,
Right, because those can get pretty heated.
they can, and they're often framed as this like either
You're either for electric vehicles or you're against them.
exactly. But what if we step back from that?
And look for a third option.
And what if we focus on decreasing our reliance on cars altogether?
Okay, I like that.
Walk more, bike more, explore alternative modes of transportation.
That's such a good point because we often get so caught up in those dominant narratives
Yeah, those either debates.
that we forget to look for those creative solutions, the solutions that actually align with our values.
I'm writing that down.
And that ultimately is what non-resistance is all about.
Okay, so it's about shifting our energy towards creating the world we want to see.
Rather than constantly battling against what we don't want.
Instead of being reactive, be proactive.
Exactly.
I love that.
It's a subtle but profound shift in perspective.
It is, and this all ties back to that idea of true revolution that the article talks about.
Right. They argue that the real revolution doesn't happen in the streets.
It's not about political system.
No, it happens within ourselves.
It's an inside job.
It is. And they emphasize that true freedom comes from liberating ourselves.
Okay, liberating ourselves from what?
From those attachments that bind us.
Attachments to,
Material possessions, societal validation, those fear-based narratives we were talking about earlier.
it's like we're so busy fighting those external battles
That we forget to look inward.
to cultivate that inner peace.
That inner freedom.
That's available to us regardless of what's happening in the world around us.
Exactly. And they share that really powerful quote by Carl Jung.
Oh, yeah, I love Carl Jung.
Who says, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes."
That's beautiful.
It's a beautiful reminder that true awakening comes from self-knowledge.
From understanding our own inner workings.
And that's something that no amount of external information can give you.
Right, because it's so easy to get caught up in the external drama.
The news cycle, the social media frenzy.
All of that.
And this article is really reminding us to step back from that.
To turn down the volume of that external noise.
And tune into our own inner wisdom.
I love that. Tune into our own inner wisdom.
And that brings us to another point that the article raises.
Okay, what's that?
Can we really find spirituality in the realm of information at all?
Good question.
Whether it's mainstream or alternative.
It's like they're saying, stop looking for answers outside yourself.
The real journey is an inward one.
Okay, I can get behind that.
And they point out that both types of media
Mainstream and alternative.
ultimately rely on capturing your attention.
Right, because they need eyeballs.
They need clicks, they need engagement.
They need to keep us hooked on their narratives.
Exactly. And whether you're consuming news that reinforces the status quo,
Or counter-information that rails against it.
you're still caught in that cycle
Of external validation.
of looking outside yourself for answers.
So it's not about finding the right information.
Or subscribing to the right ideology.
It's about recognizing that information itself can't lead us to true spiritual fulfillment.
Regardless of its source.
That's a lot to chew on.
It is. And they even include a little mini test in the article
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
to assess your susceptibility to conspiracy theories.
It was kind of fun to take, actually.
It is interesting.
It's like a little self-reflection exercise.
It makes you think.
Yeah, in some of those statements, I was like, ooh, I don't know if I agree with that one.
Yeah, it definitely highlights how easily we can get caught up in fear-based thinking.
Regardless of whether it's coming from the mainstream media or the fringes.
And that fear-based thinking can be a major obstacle on the spiritual path.
Because it keeps us in that state of reactivity.
Constantly seeking out external enemies to blame for our problem.
Instead of taking responsibility for our own inner state.
Exactly.
So if information isn't the key, then what is?
Well, the article proposes a kind of two-pronged approach.
Okay, I'm listening.
Psychological and spiritual.
Okay, let's break that down.
So on the psychological side, it's about becoming aware of our own biases.
Our own tendencies.
Yeah, and recognizing how our fear-based responses are actually feeding into that cycle of conflict.
So it's about developing self-awareness.
Self-awareness, yeah.
About understanding how our own minds work.
How we filter and interpret information.
Because we all have our own filters, right?
We do, and it's about recognizing that.
And not judging ourselves for it?
Exactly, and it also involves cultivating empathy.
Oh, that's a big one.
For other perspectives.
Even those we strongly disagree with.
Even those that trigger us.
Yeah, those are the hardest ones.
They are, but it's about recognizing that everyone is operating from their own unique set of experiences and beliefs.
So it's about trying to understand where they're coming from.
Exactly, and it doesn't mean you have to agree with them.
No, but you can at least try to see the world through their eyes.
And that can open up a whole new level of compassion and connection.
It's about remembering that we're all human.
At the end of the day, yes.
You all have our own struggles and our own joys.
And that leads us to the spiritual side of the equation.
Which, if I'm following correctly, ties back to that concept of non-resistance.
Exactly.
It's about transcending that us versus them mentality.
And focusing on creating alternatives.
Alternatives that promote
harmony, compassion, interconnectedness.
It's about shifting our energy from fighting against what we don't want
to creating what we do want.
Focusing on solutions rather than problems.
And this goes beyond just individual growth.
Oh, okay, so it's bigger than just us.
It's about collective action.
Collective action to do what?
To build systems that reflect these values.
Systems based on?
Justice, sustainability, human dignity.
That's a tall order.
It is, but it's a vision worth striving for.
It is. It's about creating a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
And it starts with each of us taking responsibility for our own inner world.
Okay, so it starts within.
It does, for how we consume information, for how we respond to challenges, for how we treat ourselves and others.
So with all of this in mind, what does this all mean for us, the listeners?
What's the takeaway message here?
Yeah, what are we supposed to do with all this?
Well, I think the article ultimately encourages us to become more conscious consumers of information.
Okay, be more discerning.
About what we allow into our minds.
Don't just consume everything that comes our way.
Exactly, and it reminds us that true freedom
comes from within.
Not from external sources.
Not from the information we consume.
Not from the ideologies we subscribe to.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose what we focus on.
To curate our own inner world.
And that choice, that act of conscious curation, is a vital step.
On the path to spiritual awakening?
Yeah, it's like we're being challenged to step up, not just be passive consumers of information.
Right.
To really take ownership of our own spiritual growth.
And not rely on counter-information or alternative media or anyone else's interpretation of the truth.
Right, like we can't just outsource our spirituality.
Yeah.
We had to do the work ourselves.
And the article really drives home this point, that both mainstream and alternative media are kind of playing the same game in a way.
Oh, interesting. How so?
They're both vying for your attention.
Oh, okay.
Your belief, your energy.
They want us to buy into their narrative.
And if we get caught up in that game, if we keep looking outside ourselves for answers, we miss the whole point.
The whole point of the spiritual journey?
Exactly.
I remember, like, there was a time when I was obsessively following all these alternative news sites. And I felt like I was uncovering the real truth.
Right. You felt like you were in the know.
Yeah. But honestly, it just left me feeling
anxious
and distrustful.
Yeah, I can see that.
It wasn't until I started like turning inward, focusing on my own practices, that I actually started to find a sense of peace.
And that really resonates with the article's message.
Yeah.
Like they encourage us to disengage from that constant battle of narrative.
Step away from the information overload.
Turn our attention inward.
It's about cultivating that inner peace.
That self-awareness.
That connection to something larger than ourselves.
That's where true spirituality lies.
And that's something no media outlet can give us.
Exactly.
Whether it's mainstream or alternative.
It's an ongoing journey, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's not a destination.
Something we have to cultivate every day.
And we have to be mindful about what we're consuming.
Okay, consuming in terms of
information, material
connections. All of it.
All of it, yeah.
It's about questioning our attachments, our desires, our fears.
Recognizing how those things keep us tethered to the external world.
And prevent us from experiencing true freedom.
And it's not easy work.
No, it's not.
It takes effort. It takes discipline.
It takes a willingness to, like, really look at ourselves.
Challenge those ingrained patterns of thinking and behaving.
Yeah, that keep us stuck.
Yeah, but I think the rewards are more than worth it.
Oh, absolutely.
When we break free from those external attachments, when we find that stillness within ourselves.
That's when we can truly awaken to our potential.
And that's what makes this so much more radical.
Okay.
So much more revolutionary.
Than just opposing the status quo.
It's about transforming ourselves from the inside out.
And in doing so,
inspiring change on a much larger scale.
So to everyone listening out there,
if you're feeling overwhelmed by the constant information bombardment,
if you're feeling lost in a sea of conflicting narratives,
take a deep breath.
Remember, the true revolution begins within.
Explore the Spiritual Seek website.
Maybe take one of their mini tests.
See what resonates with you.
And until next time,
keep seeking.
Keep questioning.
Keep diving deep.